Have you ever wondered why someone who used to talk to you every day suddenly starts replying slower or feels emotionally distant without any clear reason? Or maybe you felt it yourself, that shift where nothing obvious changed but something just feels different. What most people don't realize is this: people don't suddenly lose interest. There are silent psychological signals happening long before that distance becomes visible. And in the next few minutes, you'll understand the hidden behavioral patterns behind it. Patterns most people completely miss in real life. One truth: to understand this properly, you need to stop thinking in surface-level explanations, because in psychology, people rarely lose interest suddenly. What actually happens is much slower and much more subtle. Human attention and emotional connection don't disappear in one moment. They decline through small psychological shifts that most people don't notice at all. And the strange part is, these shifts feel so normal in real life that you completely ignore them while they're happening. That's why when the distance finally shows up, it feels sudden. But in reality, it was building quietly from the very beginning. 2. Overload. One of the first silent signs is something most people completely misunderstand. It's called emotional overload. This happens when the emotional intensity in a connection becomes too strong, too fast, or too frequent. At first, it feels like closeness, even excitement. But psychologically, the human mind doesn't stay in a constant high-emotion state for long. When things become too emotionally intense without balance, the brain naturally starts to pull back just to restore stability. And here's the part people miss. This pullback doesn't feel like rejection at the beginning. It feels like small distance, slower replies, less excitement, less engagement. But in reality, it's the mind trying to protect itself from emotional saturation. 3. Curiosity loss. Another silent sign happens when curiosity disappears from the connection. In psychology, curiosity is one of the strongest drivers of emotional interest. When someone feels like they already know everything about you, or the interaction becomes too predictable, something important starts to fade. Not suddenly, but slowly. The brain stops feeling stimulated, and when stimulation drops, emotional engagement naturally follows. This is why even good conversations can start feeling empty over time, not because something is wrong, but because the mind is no longer discovering anything new. And once curiosity is gone, emotional attention starts to shift elsewhere without any clear warning. 4. Pressure. There is another subtle shift that most people completely misread, and this one is very powerful in human psychology. It happens when interaction slowly stops feeling natural and starts feeling like expectation. At first, you don't notice it, but over time, every message, every conversation, every interaction starts carrying a sense of pressure. Not obvious pressure, but psychological pressure. The feeling that you are expected to respond in a certain way, or maintain a certain energy, even when you don't feel like it. And here's what the mind does in that situation. It starts creating distance to reduce that pressure. Not because of dislike, but because humans naturally avoid emotional discomfort. So what looks like losing interest is often just the mind trying to escape psychological weight. 5. Perception shift. Now here is something most people never think about. Human interest is not static. It constantly changes based on perception. The way someone sees you in the beginning is not the same way they see you later, because the brain is always updating value based on experience, emotion, and repetition. And this update process is extremely subtle. Small shifts in perception happen without words, without arguments, without any obvious event. But over time, these small updates can change how emotionally important someone feels in a connection. And when perceived value shifts, emotional interest naturally follows that direction. Not because someone decides it, but because the brain recalibrates it automatically. 6. Emotional space. There is one more psychological factor that quietly affects emotional interest more than anything else, and it's something called emotional space. In human psychology, emotional connection doesn't grow through constant closeness alone. It also requires space, space to think, space to miss, space to process emotions without pressure. When this space is missing, something interesting happens. The mind starts to feel crowded, and when emotional space feels crowded, interest naturally starts to weaken. Not because the connection is bad, but because the brain needs distance to maintain clarity and emotional balance. Realization. So when you put all of this together, it becomes clear that people don't suddenly lose interest. It's never just one moment or one action or one mistake. It's a slow combination of emotional overload, loss of curiosity, subtle pressure, shifting perception, and lack of emotional space. And the most important realization is this: most people only notice the outcome, not the process that led to it. That's why it always feels sudden even though it was building quietly all along. And once you understand this, you start seeing human behavior in a completely different way, not as random emotions, but as patterns of psychology that repeat again and again in everyday life. And the real question becomes, how many of these patterns have you already experienced without even realizing it? If this changed the way you see people, like this video, share it, and subscribe, because human behavior always leaves clues if you know where to look.